Putin's war is collapsing under its own debt. $446 billion are buried inside of Russia's banks, disguised as growth. Each dollar feeds missiles, it bribes judges, and it fuels the illusion of control. Every explosion in Ukraine now deepens Moscow's debt back at home. But now the illusion is cracking. For the first time in years, we are seeing protest inside of Russia. The Daily Beast, its Anna Nemtsova, released a video from Moscow of a woman screaming, insinuating that the Kremlin's corruption was causing their poverty. She was filmed yelling at the Kremlin gates that, quote, "we're sick of seeing them fill rooms with cash." The pensioners there began to applaud, and the police hesitated. Hunger, not politics, drove her rage. That moment revealed what Putin fears most: the loss of fear itself. In St. Petersburg, musicians in the recent weeks have been jailed for anti-war songs. Their protest, however, spread across Telegram within hours. And now, those protests are known across the country. Silence is no longer submission. Each arrest exposes the hidden cost of the regime's debt. When the economy breaks, obedience breaks with it. Behind every ruble borrowed is another soldier missing from the draft. Recruitment shortfalls in Yakutia reached 40%. Coffins are returning faster from Ukraine than the wages arrive to the workers. The Kremlin can still jail a singer, but it cannot imprison arithmetic. Russia's war machine is powered by debt, by denial, by decay. But now, time is catching up. This is the arithmetic of collapse. The numbers simply do not work out for the Kremlin. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. What we see going on right now is incredible. Russia really is in a corner. Its economy today does not add up. It does not have the solvency necessary to continue fighting. And that's why it becomes all the more absurd when we read that Ukraine needs to be pressured into talks. Quite the opposite. It's Russia that must be very clear that it will crack up and break unless it gets peace soon. So it is in fact the Russians that are the weaker party in this. But that is just the reason that today we must put ever more pressure on Russia. Today is a day to bring the Kremlin to its knees. So help me get this message to more people. The truth that is Russia that is losing this war, not Ukraine. Here in Ukraine, where I am, there's a sense of victory being near. All I ask you to do is this: help us to reach 250,000 subscribers. We're just short of it. All you have to do, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. And if you were subscribed before, please check that you are still subscribed. A lot of people are writing saying that they were unsubscribed against their will or that they no longer receive the notifications. So let's take a look at this arithmetic of collapse. Russia's war today is financed by credit, not by the cash that they have, nor by courage, obviously. But that's all because of a secret law that they passed back in February 2022. That law forces quote-unquote authorized banks to lend money to the government. Now, in this equation, the government sets the size, the rate, and the maturity for these loans. The banks obey under threat and incentive. This is not a fiscal policy, however. It is economic conscription. Russia's wartime debt machine has reached an astonishing scale. The $446 billion surge in corporate borrowing that equals roughly 95% of the Kremlin's official defense budget. Measured against Russia's $2 trillion GDP, that sum represents about 22% of the entire Russian economy. It shows how the invasion has become dependent on credit expansion, not on production. The war is now financed less by taxes or by exports, and more by hidden borrowing pushed through state banks. Between July 2022 and November 2024, corporate borrowing surged by 71%. That was $446 billion in new war-related debt recorded by the Central Bank of Russia. Nearly every major loan comes with state guarantees or some sort of orders behind it. The Kremlin effectively outsourced its war budget to the banking system. This is the real war chest. It's off budget and unaccountable. It keeps the invasion alive even as the revenues shrink, as the sanctions bite. Firms are pushed into loans that they would never take in peacetime. State banks absorb the risk that the private lenders refused, turning the system into a command economy disguised as finance. But there's something else here. Today, the banks in Russia don't have enough money. Depositors cannot take their money out. And that's because they lack liquidity. They lack liquidity because though officially they have money, in reality they don't. They've been giving secret loans to the government. This is just what you need to have a Ponzi scheme. We have one borrowing money from the other, promising that they'll get the return, but in fact, nobody gets their money. Everybody gets burned. Russia is looking more and more like it is going to go bust. Consider this. These loans, they go across 15 different war-related sectors, from arms and transport to energy and chemicals. Credit to these sectors has grown 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. The chemical industry alone added the equivalent of 20% of total arms procurement. Propellant, explosives, and logistics companies expanded on command of the government, not by market logic. Each loan was a silent mobilization order. Each ruble borrowed was another step towards turning Russia's economy into a permanent war engine. Russia's wartime economy now runs on credit, not profitability. The central bank calls these borrowers rate sensitive. When interest rates hit 21%, they kept borrowing anyways. Real businesses could not survive that sort of a cost. Yet the war contractors, they could. AA rated bonds paid 27%, and the deals kept clearing. BBB rated bonds, they climbed to 37%, and the issuers kept returning. The state guaranteed contracts and cash flows, shielding insiders from the risk. Lenders complied to avoid political punishment, not because of the fear of economic loss. Thousands of firms now carry debt that exists only because of this war. But today, inflation is increasing. Inflation is hovering near 10% according to the official numbers. But sanctions are not the main cause for that. The real driver is the credit flood unleashed to sustain the invasion. Borrowed money conceals a fiscal deficit that exceeds 6% of GDP if counted honestly. Official figures claim that it is nearly 2%, a fiction built on accounting tricks. Government debt would be 137% higher if off-budget guarantees were included. The Kremlin's so-called resilience narrative depends on forced credit and censorship. Prices rise as excess money chases scarce labor and raw materials. Russia's economy is overheating, not recovering. This illusion hides 4 converging dangers for the Russian economy. First, macroeconomic instability as inflation feeds on a false wartime boom. Second, real sector distress as solvent firms lose affordable credit. Third, banking fragility from opaque state-directed loans that no one can value. Fourth, a post-war debt bomb waiting to explode when state orders end. When these contracts vanish, defaults will cascade throughout the suppliers. The Kremlin will have to rescue the same system it had itself distorted. Putin once bragged of no limits in its financing. By late 2024, he conceded spending cannot go on forever. However, the off-budget scheme is hitting hard limits right now. Russia now has 3 compromised cash sources. The sovereign wealth fund is restricted and partly liquid. Oil and gas revenues are weakened by sanctions and by market loss. But also domestic borrowing capacity is near its ceiling at current rates. The financial fuse is lit, it's burning, and it's going the direction of an explosion. That is why the protests are now spreading. The dissent now spans across the communists, the liberals, the monarchists. Gennady Zhuganov, who denounced economic policy on state radio. Now, Zhuganov, for those who don't know who he is, has dominated the Communist Party of Russia since the 1990s. He has always acted as a loyal opposition, while in fact backing the Kremlin's wars. His break signals stress inside the regime's own base. He warned that 20% rates could, quote, run us to nowhere. He called the potato price quadrupling a disgrace. The potato, once a symbol of endurance, now symbolizes collapse. Russians cannot afford potatoes. So today, when the approved critics of the Kremlin begin to revolt, fear has lost its value. Consider this. Tsargrad TV, a nationalist television station in Russia, owned by an oligarch very close to the Kremlin, Konstantin Malafeyev. He's recently been doing a lot of things that you would not expect for somebody close to the Kremlin. His hosts are demanding the purges of officials who they'd formerly been praising. Putin today is seeing that those closest to him are starting to become very concerned. Now, so far, they do not blame Putin himself. They blame others around him, but not him directly. But the fact is, we see what's going on. There's only one person responsible for all these problems, and his name is Vladimir Putin. Today, we see that those closest to Putin aren't so sure that things are going to work out all right. The spell of fear is breaking under this arithmetic. Today, 70% of Russians now favor peace talks. Hospitals and schools are in a state of decay. Defense spending is doubling. Pensioners in St. Petersburg survive on less than $20 a week. Rural families live on roughly half of that. Teachers moonlight as cleaners and as taxi drivers. This is not resilience. It is depletion dressed as duty. While the country bleeds, Putin's own inner circle continues to thrive. Consider Svetlana Krivonok. She's a former cleaner. She used to be a maid. Today, she has a $100 million fortune. Consider Alina Kabaeva. She lives under state protection with her sons. They live in a massive estate with gold chandeliers and a private gym. But these people, who are they? How do they have so much money? How do they have such great lives? Well, they happen to be lovers or former lovers of Vladimir Putin. If you're close to Putin, you can have whatever you want. You can live a life that nobody in Russia could ever imagine. But today, that's not working out so well. The cracks in the economy, they mirror those in the army. Recruitment in poor regions of Russia, like Yakutia, is falling. People there are desperate for money, but now those who took the money, they usually didn't return from the war. So people have learned their lesson. Hence the 40% shortfall in not just Yakutia, but multiple poor regions. Many villages there lost an entire generation of men. Russia's manpower crisis is not a rumor, it's a demographic fact, seen in the empty schools and in the constant parade of funerals. Ukraine's innovations are helping to cause this. They're helping to protect Ukrainian soldiers' lives by making sure that there are less Russian soldiers fighting against Ukraine. As Russia now struggles to keep things together, the Ukrainians are advancing. Ukraine's Sea Baby, the drones, they travel 1,500 kilometers or 932 miles. They carry 2,000 kilograms, 4,400 pounds of explosives. The range gap that they have compared to the Russians is a factor of 10. The Russians' UMBP-5, the glide bombs, it can only reach 200 kilometers or 124 miles. Ukrainian engineers are turning scarcity into reach. There's been a number of different groups now creating drones that are changing this war. They are striking factories within Russia. Look at the factory in Dzerzhinsk, 370 kilometers or 230 miles east of Moscow. Strikes hit Saransk, 800 kilometers, 500 miles from Ukraine's border. Each strike cost Russia more than it can admit. Each one shows that Russia can no longer sustain the cost of this war, can no longer absorb the damage. The war's moral center has shifted. The side defending freedom holds the edge in willpower and in technology. Financial exhaustion explains the escalation, though. Today, Russia doesn't know how to win. It engages in terrorism. We've seen continuously as civilians in Ukraine are killed by the Russians. On October 25th, Russia launched 9 missiles and 62 Shahed drones. 4 Ukrainian civilians died as a result. 16 were wounded. Ukraine intercepted 50 drones and 4 missiles. But the goal here is psychological, not strategic. Each missile is funded by debt, and each drone is financed through coercion. And each attack is meant to deplete Ukraine of enthusiasm, of the desire to fight and to win. But today, that's not possible. In Ukraine, here, the people are united. They demand victory and nothing less. However, the Russians do not have that. The Russians do not have a population that is united. They have a population that is increasingly protesting, a population that is increasingly unhappy with their quality of lives getting worse by the day. Today, though, there's something else. We can be sure about this. Russia, even if the war ends tomorrow, will not get out of the ticking time bomb that it has built for itself. The economic system in Russia will collapse. When the war ends, the silence will also break. Defense contractors will default as contracts vanish. Banks will face a wave of insolvencies. The Kremlin will print or borrow to survive. Inflation will yet again surge. The state will bail itself out. The ruble will die a second death. Putin's dilemma is arithmetic, not ideology. He cannot stop spending without admitting defeat. He cannot keep borrowing without triggering a crash. Each missile burns a loan banks cannot recover. Each glide bomb adds compound interest towards collapse. Propaganda says this is all resilience, but the numbers do not. The numbers say that this is rot. Off-budget war debts near the entire defense budget. The real deficit is triple the reported figure. Inflation and corruption are functioning as state policy. The strong state became a debtor's prison guarded by fear. The regime's foundations are cracking on all sides. Mothers and pensioners confront guards outside the Kremlin. Nationalists are accusing their own judges of betrayal. Loyalists turn on the war's architects. The vertical of power collapses into the horizontal blame. For Ukraine and its allies, choosing strategic patience is the right course of action. Russia cannot sustain both war and solvency. Its debts are Western leverage. Sanctions and freezes act as pressure valves on a reactor. Each month, the $446 billion debt continues to grow. Moscow's bargaining power shrinks accordingly. When officials beg for sanction relief, it will not mean peace. Vladimir Putin said that the new sanctions in the West mean nothing, but the fact that he jumped so quickly to talk about this shows that he's worried about these sanctions. The fact that he knows that his economy cannot withstand much more. So today, what we see in Russia is a serious situation, where they have a situation that there is desperation spreading in the society, not just in the Kremlin. But there is another aspect of this. The moral calculus in this is simple. Ukraine's endurance is real. Russia's economy is synthetic. One side is building, the other is borrowing. Time is the ultimate sanction, and it is already taking effect. The protests at the Kremlin gates are not isolated. It echoes balance sheets collapsing behind the palace walls. The crowd's anger was unpaid interest made audible. And today the regime is silent. It doesn't know what to do because it's nearing default. The world should study that silence very carefully. It should pay attention to the fact that this superpower, allegedly, is discovering bankruptcy, financial rot, moral decay. This is how empires end, precisely like this. Not with revolutions, but with receipts. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. And please do check out the first pinned link to see how you too can contribute to get drones to save Ukrainian soldiers' lives. And also, if you're a scientist, check out in the first pinned link as well an organization looking for people with a science background who can help Ukraine to win. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.